Yes. The Bōsōzoku, the tragic story if you actually know what you're looking at. When I look back over like the last 13, 14 years of looking at automotive history and automotive cultures, there's probably none as interesting as the Bōsōzoku or like the Black Emperor's Gang, which is essentially what it kind of came from. And there's a lot of different groups. There's a lot of history in this. But one of the things that I find weirdest about this entire thing is that people absolutely despise street takeovers, yet idolize the Bōsōzoku and the methodology and kind of like what they believe in, but they're almost the same exact thing. So I figured I would talk a little bit about it to see if maybe there are things you didn't know about the Bōsōzoku and the styling and the culture of it, and why it may not be that different than street takeovers, and everybody being upset about that, and seeing if you still agree. Cats, do you agree? That's what I thought so. I'm Alex Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and today we're talking about cars. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more or you enjoy reading, there's a blog now out on alexmartini.net that you can go give a read. We just came back from Formula Drift, so if you enjoy listening to somebody that sounds like they're 6 years old with a keyboard, I'd highly recommend checking it out. We also have new gear as well. So going into the Bōsōzoku and the Black Emperor's Gang, a quick history kind of definition. Started back in the 50s, and it started after people were coming back from World War II. These men that did return were never actually planning on really returning. There was really only 2 options. They were going to win or they were going to die. And when they came back and they realized that there was a 3rd option that wasn't actually available to them until after the whole thing ended, it left them feeling like they had no purpose in life. They were very, very upset with the government. They were very, very upset with the concept of failure. And because of that, they needed to define themselves by throwing them back into something that was exciting, loud, obnoxious, and dangerous. And that is where the Black Emperor's Gang was really founded. And it was really built upon anti-government, anti-establishment, and anti-rules because they were so angry and disappointed in everything that had transpired in World War II and moving forward. And it really did grow. Like, it grew exponentially fast. I think by the mid-80s, Bōsōzoku, that group of individuals, was over 40,000 active members at one time. You could identify them. They had very specific clothing that they would wear. They had different gang names or clan names that they would have. And for the most part, this was a growing issue within Japan. So much so that the police were actually really trying to crack down on this sort of stuff as much as they possibly could. But with everybody having motorcycles, which is where the Bōsōzoku really kind of had their place in history with, not cars, it's really hard to track any of them down because motorcycles are motorcycles and they're very, very fast and it's very easy to get away. So when you hear this history of where the Bōsōzoku came from and kind of their like almost position as being anti-everything, you would start to realize that it was a little bit more of a gang than you probably would admit. They would do things like beat up the younger members as a rite of passage. They would rob, steal, kidnap. There was aggravated assault cases. There was damage to property consistently and constantly all the time. And it was a big issue. And the reason I associate it with street takeovers is because you kind of look at what a street takeover embodies, which is this like loud, obnoxious, F the system, we do what we want kind of mentality, and everybody hates it, right? But then there's those same people like on TikTok and stuff that then go and defend and love the origins and the history of the Bōsōzoku, when inherently they're kind of similar in nature. Now, I would argue street takeovers may be fighting the establishment for a much more shallow reason than maybe the initial generation of the Bōsōzoku, but the statement still stands that both of them are trying to make noise and pretty much say F you. So as the Bōsōzoku grew, really the only thing that made that entire group kind of dissipate into the early 90s was the post-war bubble collapse and the economy going to absolute because in Japan, the Bōsōzoku were, comprised a lot of non-educated, sometimes a little bit lower income groups of individuals. And so when they didn't have the money, they couldn't buy the motorcycles, they couldn't buy anything. And that membership, I guess, went from 42,000 to less than 10,000 pretty damn quick. The reason that Bōsōzoku though is such an interesting concept to me is because it almost feels like, as we look back in the last 5-10 years, it's almost like commercialized. It's gotten to a point where even the name Bōsōzoku was actually coined by the Japanese media, then used as their name. They didn't actually have a name until the media named them that. And then once that came about, I feel like that almost kind of pegged the failure of what would ultimately come this concept of rebelliousness in Japan culture using motorcycles or automotive as like a marketing tool. Because nowadays, it kind of seems like it is that way. It's like almost a marketing ploy and a way to like push this sales agenda rather than it is kind of like looking back as to why it was ever created in the first place. The reason I associate it with street takeovers is because it kind of also feels very similar. Now, the Bosozoku styling, that's completely up to you on whether you like it or not. Me personally, I can say I'm not a huge fan. And I know it seems weird to not like something from Japanese culture right now because everyone in the automotive scene seems to love anything that either comes from, came from, had, or once was originated in Japan. And that's cool if that's your thing, but I can honestly say it's just not my thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just don't really enjoy the styling. I don't enjoy how much excessiveness exists in that culture and that type of automotive styling. But maybe it's for you. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. But I do think it's worth asking yourself as you look at car culture and as everybody seems to be getting so very divided, for some reason, maybe it's because of the internet, maybe TikTok's just a new form of Fox and CNN, who knows? But as everyone seems to get more divided in their opinions of things and how there can only exist one extreme or another extreme, and there's no sense of being in the middle, you have to ask yourself, why do you think people idolize Bōsōzoku and the styling and the rebelliousness of it, yet on the very same flip side, absolutely despise that same exact style of or mentality here in the United States? And it does kind of beg the question, and I'm not one to defend it. I don't like street takeovers, I hate them. But is it fair to like one and not like the other? And let me know below if you believe one way or another, because I think that's a very interesting concept because it goes across a lot of different cultures. And because the car community is international, that means that you are playing with different principles depending upon what you like or what you don't like. Or is it just not that deep? Maybe it's just not that deep, you know? I just thought it was a cool story. It's probably one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm Alex Martini with 2 underscores. Today we talked about cars, and we will see you later. Adios.